How are you coming out on this hot morning? It is a joy to welcome everyone here today to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Harford County. We acknowledge every week that our building is situated on the native lands of the Susquehannock people, and we are committed to moving beyond just merely acknowledging this fact to some kind of action that would promote greater understanding of Indigenous peoples' concerns and rights. I'm Kimberly Roberts again, and my pronouns are she and her. And leading with me in the service is Sarah Brinkerhoff.
Good morning. Good morning. We gather each Sunday morning on site and online to share life's meaning, to grow in caring community, to open our hearts and minds to the sacred truth known by many names.
We gather in community to restore the balance of our spirits, to celebrate the joys of life, and to find strength to meet our sorrows, and in the earliest meaning of the word worship, to consider ideas that are worthy of our time and attention.
Unitarian Universalism is a religious tradition that values diversity, but embraces the wisdom of all faiths. We use science, reason, and the gifts of the Spirit to explore life's mystery and meaning.
In this tradition, we know that people need not think alike to love alike.
Whatever your heritage, however your history, whomever you love, you are welcome here.
Now may the sound of the bell and the music of our prelude center us all as we enter into this time of worship.
Patriotism. There's a word thrown around a lot. It inspires passionate debate and is worn like a badge of honor, and with good reason, because it means love and devotion for one's country. Love. For a word designed to unite, it can also be pretty divisive. You see, there's more to patriotism than flag seeking with onesies and rodeos and quadruple cheeseburgers. Patriotism is love for a country, not just pride in it. But what really makes up this country of ours? What is it we love? It's more than just a huge rock full of animals like cougars and eagles, right? It's the people. Do me a favor. Close your eyes for a second. I want to try something. Picture the average U.S. citizen. Think about it. How old are they? What's their hair like? How much can they bench? You got one? Okay. So chances are, the person you're picturing right now looks a little different to the real average American. There are 319 million U.S. citizens. 51% are female. So first off, the average American is a woman. Cool, huh? Is that what you pictured? 54 million are Latino, 40 million senior citizens, 27 million are disabled, 18 million are Asian. That's more people in the U.S. than play football and baseball combined. 9 million are lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, more than the entire amount of people that live in the state of Virginia. Around 10 million are redhead, 5.1 million play ultimate frisbee, and 3.5 million are Muslim. Triple the number of people currently serving in the United States military. Almost half the country belongs to minority groups. People who are lesbian, African American, and bi, and transgender, and Native American, and proud of it. We know that labels don't devalue us, they help define us, keeping us dialed into our cultures and our beliefs and who we are as Americans. After all, what's more American than freedom to celebrate the things that make us, us? I mean, it's stitched into the stars and stripes of this country. From the Constitution to Gettysburg, to our motto, E pluribus unum, from many, one. It's even in our country's name, the United States. This year, patriotism shouldn't just be about pride of country. It should be about love. Love beyond age, disability, sexuality, race, religion, and any other labels. Because the second any of us judge people based on those labels, we're not really being patriotic, are we? So let's try this one more time. Close your eyes. Picture the average Joe or Joan or Juan or Jean-Luc. The real people who make America, America. And this year, whenever you feel the urge to don those star-spangled shorts, set off fireworks the size of my biceps to show love for our country, remember that to love America is to love all Americans. Because love has no labels.
patriotism mean? What does love of country mean? And how do you find the words to express it, your own words to express your own sense of what it means to be a citizen of this country? Love of freedom, freedom of speech and movement, human rights and civil rights. What else? What does it mean to be engaged in the magnificent experiment of democratic government that this country is, with its brilliant promise of pluralism, where, as John Cena says, love has no labels, as yet a promise unfulfilled, but beckoning and possible. Together this morning, we're going to be exploring some answers in a series of reflections and musical interludes. Now it's time for our chalice lighting. May the light of truth illumine our minds. May the spark of love set our hearts on fire. May the flame of freedom burn brightly within us, now and always. As we lean ever more deeply into our mission as Unitarian Universalists, we renew our commitment as a community to respond out of deep care for one another. Now is the time to briefly share a sorrow, a joy, a gratitude, something that you're carrying deeply within your hearts this morning, something that means something to you. And if you're on site in the sanctuary, please come to the front and speak into the microphone, and Sarah will light your candle. And if you're on Zoom, just use the chat function. I have it up here on my phone. I'll be keeping an eye on it. And you can share that way, and I will read what you'd like to share aloud as Sarah lights the candle. And the usual reminders: this is not a time for announcements or politics. That comes later. Please say your first name. Please share from your heart and from your own experience, and be mindful not to share anybody else's experience unless they gave you their permission to do so. Would anyone like to share? Before we do our offering, while that music was playing, we had 2 candles. And I'll light this one for Joanne McDonald, who's lighting it for her late husband, Bruce McDonald. And I will light another candle. Brenna Kofferman would like us to light one for her band members they finally were at full band strength. They've had some problems, some people are recovering from surgery, and everybody's back at it and very joyful. Mike? Johnson is going to share the first reflection this morning.
I'm going to be able to. Thank you, that's perfect. As long as folks can hear, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, good morning. My name's Mike Johnson. I'll be honest, I didn't realize till this morning that the John Cena clip was going to be playing before my reflection. I can promise you none of the background music or the, awesome, inspiring words, but I do want to share with you a little bit of my thoughts on patriotism and love of country. I've spent my adult life serving as an active duty officer in the Army. And I share that with you because it undoubtedly influences my thoughts on patriotism and love of country. When a military officer accepts their commission, they swear an oath to the Constitution to protect and defend it from all enemies, foreign and domestic. In other words, to guard the ideas and ideals within the Constitution. Following the attacks of 9/11, I was in one of the first units to deploy to and return from a tour in Afghanistan. It was 2002. The enemy, Al-Qaeda, was clear. The reason for fighting was easily framed then as democracy versus terror, or freedom versus theocracy, or perhaps even good versus evil. In the months following our return, many of us, sporting our newly acquired combat patches on the right shoulder of our uniforms, found our lunches were already paid for when we got to the register. At the time, I was blinded perhaps by youth's desire for respect and walked around a little taller, assuming that my actions were a high form of patriotism. Since then, I've questioned those assumptions. I've wondered why people anonymously bought us lunches. Was this a demonstration of their love of country? Had we, as soldiers, expressed some exceptional love of country for doing something that we'd volunteered to do and that society paid us to do? On a separate tour to Afghanistan in 2012, the clarity of 2002 was largely gone. Iraq was rapidly winding down, but had arguably tarnished American purpose and values. Al-Qaeda was on the run, bin Laden dead, and the Taliban now the enemy. In fact, as passed down through the chain of command, our reason for being in Afghanistan was that we were executing the lawful will of the American people, a stark contrast to the clarity of 2002. However, I could still anchor myself and my purpose in Afghanistan to the ideas and the ideals of the Constitution, which stood in contrast to the Taliban's governing proposition. Now, I'm no constitutional expert or scholar, but I've had a lot of time to think about America, about love of country, about patriotism, and I've come to appreciate that patriotism is best tied to the set of ideas and ideals that are set out in the Constitution. Ideals not always met, but with the flexibility to change and hopefully improve over time. I think it's fair to say that I'm a true believer in the democratic experiment. I'm heavily influenced by the idea that a healthy democracy, which exercises these constitutional ideals, goes hand in hand with a strong and healthy civil society. As defined by the United Nations, civil society organizations are non-governmental, task-oriented, and driven by people with a common interest to perform a variety of services and humanitarian functions, to bring citizens' concerns to government, monitor policies, and encourage participation at the community level. In America, these organizations operate within the space guaranteed by the Constitution. Although participants may not fully recognize it, civil society is about engaging in and protecting freedoms. I think sometimes that we, as Americans, take our civil society for granted because we may not appreciate the role it has in solidifying our democracy. Consider that in many non-democratic governments around the world, leaders take extraordinary actions to stifle civil society so that the population becomes solely reliant on the state, meaning they are solely reliant on those political leaders. These leaders want no alternatives to their power and control. They don't want a messy society that engages at the community level. Madeleine Albright and Condoleezza Rice in recent books both argue that a strong civil society is the hallmark of a healthy democracy. And over the years, I've come to believe the same. In closing, I believe patriotism is anchored in the ideas and the ideals found in the Constitution, which can best be expressed through participation in a robust civil society. So if you ever find yourself thanking a veteran for their service or anonymously buying a young soldier lunch, consider also thanking those who work and volunteer across America and across American civil society for their patriotism, for their work is as patriotic and demonstrates their love of country. Thank you.
You know, growing up in, whoa, I changed a little bit. Can you hear me okay? Great. Growing up in church, I always thought that the offering should come after the minister speaks, because then you're going to be more grateful, right? And you're going to give more. So I'm just going to say that. So thank you, Mike. Each Sunday, we receive an offering to support the mission of the congregation. Here we intentionally welcome pluralism, theological beliefs, and seek to learn from one another. We care for those within the fellowship and extend our care into the wider community through actions of love and justice, which, no matter how small, grows and can transform our world. Your contributions allow this congregation to reach out to all who seek a life-affirming message of love and hope. If you're online, click the link in the Zoom chat to contribute. If you're on site, you may place a donation in the basket, which I'm going to pass in just a minute, and in keeping with our religious heritage, to draw the circle of love and justice a little bit wider.
and we can make sure this microphone works for you. How's that seem? Good?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
When Kim asked me to give a speech here, I guess she thought that military people had something different with regard to patriotism than the normal American. Not so sure she's right there, but in any event, I told her I would speak. She said, well, make it short. I really hadn't thought too much about the subject of patriotism. So the first thing I did was ask Google. And Google said, a patriot is a person who vigorously supports their country and is prepared to defend it against enemies or detractors. That's Google's definition. Did you all pick up that adverb? That vigorously? Let's leave that out. Let's leave that adverb out and see what happens. Basically, well, it caught my attention. That's about all I can say about it. Really, when you get right down to it, a patriot is a person who supports their country, prepared to defend and against enemies and detractors. That's all one has to do. Just support the country and be prepared to defend it. Now, for this short discussion, I'm going to take the easy way out, disregarding that adverb, and look at it from what difference does it have with being in the military and not being in the military. As Mike pointed out, commissioned officers have taken an oath, while most Americans have not. That oath is short and straightforward. You promise to, first, defend the Constitution, second, to faithfully do your duties of that office that you hold. Not much. It gives you the authority to act, but also the requirement to act. The oath remains in effect, by the way, for as long as you live, not just while you serve. So I guess that just taking the oath automatically makes you a patriot. Now, enlisted military personnel do not have to take that same oath. They don't. But they are, in fact, serving in the military. That in itself, some patriots. Now, naturalized citizens, they have to take an oath of allegiance. That's just their final step to becoming American citizens. If you've ever been to a ceremony in which that takes place, it's a very solemn and special ceremony for the people that are taking that oath. Their oath is a little bit different. It has several different things it covers. First, you renounce the allegiances to foreign countries. Second, you defend the Constitution. And third, you serve in the military if needed. And there's lots more they'd have to do also. But right there, once they become citizens, they're patriots. Now, during their lifetimes, some Americans take oaths, such as, I promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, you know. They take oaths for different purposes, but their level of commitment is different. And rarely do they swear to defend the Constitution. That bond, that difference, is really not going to make them patriots. Now, really, I don't have the right to take away that adverb, that vigorous adverb. So let's put it back in. What does vigorous mean? In a way that involves physical strength, effort, or energy. Similar words are strenuously, with great vigor, and forcefully. Involves physical strength, effort, or energy. Takes that to become a patriot? Really? If it does, that leaves out a lot of people. Probably leaves me out. It's a high bar for Americans to really be vigorous in their defense of our Constitution. Now, as for me, this 4th of July was the 66th Independence Day that I've experienced since my commission in the Army. I and my classmates took that oath that we described earlier to become commissioned officers. It was, I remember it was on the 4th of June. The day was hot and sunny. We held our commissioning ceremony right outside of the barracks that we had lived in for 4 years together. It was a solemn ceremony. Just the people in our company were involved. Other companies were doing the same thing. So here we were, 34 of us that had lived together 4 years, and we're now taking this oath. When it was all over, we just stood there silently. No excitement, no uproarious cheers or anything like that. It was amazing. It was just silence. I think we were absorbed with this sudden realization that now we were different. A lot different. But I do not think that any of us at that moment thought of ourselves as patriots. Not yet. That happened a long time ago. I spent 22 years in the military after that. I retired. It was 23 years after I retired that we had 9/11. So my opportunities to defend the Constitution occurred long before Afghanistan and all of the activities that we're going through now. It's a long time ago, and I must confess my memories are very dim on a lot of activities that I've done. But looking back on that moment when we took our oath, I still get a tingle up my back when I think about how we reacted to that moment. I lost 13 classmates in Vietnam. That's not many of the 50,000, but they were my classmates. Our country, our Americans in our country, did not appreciate what we were doing, had been doing during that time. They didn't like the military. They didn't like us individually for what we had been doing. But I think what we did was vigorous and strenuous, and we were following our orders. So in that sense, I guess we were patriots. Well, that's about all I have to say on it. It's tough. It's tough being a patriot. And I think it's wonderful when there is opportunities for Americans who are not serving in the military to show their vigorous efforts at saving the Constitution, which apparently is in jeopardy as we speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Now we'll hear from Dirk.
Plenty high enough. I'm going to take a little bit of a different look at this, but looking at definitions, patriotism is defined as devotion to one's country. A patriot is one who loves his country, or her country, and zealously guards its welfare. It's a defender of popular liberty. The source for the definitions were from Funk and Wangel's Standardized Encyclopedia, and by this definition, it requires, in my mind at least, an individual analysis and commitment. It's not strictly military. I think it extends beyond whether you were in the military or not. And I did spend 20 years, 5 months, and 20 days in the Marine Corps, so yeah, it was interesting. The definition I just read raised several questions to me. First, there are several hundred countries on this earth, and each of them likely contains many patriots by this definition. Each country has its own history, unique government, its own set of laws, goals, beliefs, and relations with neighboring countries. By the dictionary definition, the patriots in each country would likely claim to be a defender of popular liberty. Unfortunately, each nation likely has a different idea of what that popular liberty is and what is necessary to guard that liberty. Within each country, there will likely be many different individual interpretations of what it constitutes what patriotism constitutes. Thus, the differences and relations among the world's nations, and even among individuals within those nations, understandably can range from congenial to violent protest. Our country is an excellent example of this dichotomy. Generally, all of our political parties are convinced that they have the answer to what our country is and what it stands for, and how it should be governed and how it should relate to other nations. Additionally, many citizens have rejected the various parties and patriotism itself and just try to survive individually without a need or reason to guard the welfare of the nation. So what does this mean to us as individuals and as citizens in the United States? First, we need to determine if we individually love our country and its institutions, each one of us. What is the nation doing right in your mind? What needs to be changed or fixed? Related to this is the need to elevate both internal and external threats to our nation. What is important to you about our nation? Is it important enough that you feel the compulsion to do something to protect it? If you actually do, you may be considered to be a patriot. Next, we need to determine how we want to contribute to protecting what it is that we love about our nation and how to resist that which threatens our individual concepts of what is important. Some suggestions that I feel would make you a patriot. First, find and join like-minded organizations and individuals. Be with people that believe the same thing you do if you can. Second, be active, participate in meetings, planning, fundraising, educating, recruiting, protests, marches, write articles documenting your views, vote for proposals that support your beliefs, donate to organizations that support your beliefs, and on and on. As a last resort, and only as a last resort, fight. I think fighting is actually necessary sometimes. In my mind, if you follow and practice all of these concepts, and the issue you are working for is focused on the greater good in your nation, then you are a patriot. A closing thought for you. Military members are often thought to be and are referred to as patriots. This is true in the sense that they are committed to the physical protection of the country from outside threats. Most, if not all, military members would not normally think of themselves as individually as patriots. Rather, they are doing a job that occasionally becomes a very nasty job. Hello, Vietnam. When you are being shot at, you have other things to think about. Patriotism is absolutely not being considered when you're actually in a fight. In doing that job, the individual military members surrender some individual liberties. For example, they are required to follow the orders of the officers appointed over them, as you've heard. There's little or no way to avoid this. The unit must act as one if they want to succeed. Failure to do so will likely produce failure for everyone, with a high probability of casualties. And that's the end of my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk.
You think you know this land is your land. I did. But actually, most of us don't. Woody Guthrie wrote it in anger as a critical response to Irving Berlin's God Bless America. You see, during his travels in the 1930s, Guthrie was witness to prejudice, violence, hatred, and hunger. And he felt that the last thing this country needed was Berlin's heavenly endorsement. Guthrie's words capture the endless beauty of this country, from the endless skyways to the diamond deserts to the waving wheat fields. But the original lyrics are actually full of radical ideas. For one thing, it questions the very notion of private property. And it balances those depictions of physical beauty with images of hungry people in line at the relief office. Is this land made for you and me? That ambiguous, questioning, nuanced, angry, but ultimately hopeful version is not the one that we know today. The tougher versions are gone. They've disappeared. The arrangements are bland, quite trite, aren't they? And so what we're left with is a piece that we hear performed so often, but we don't actually hear it anymore. It's turned into God Bless America. So, what we'd like to do for you is perform a song that we often take for granted, but hopefully you'll hear it in a new way.
In her sermon written just after 9/11, UU minister Reverend Victoria Safford opens with this story. A child I know, when asked this week whether she would answer the call of her elementary school principal to wear red, white, and blue clothes on Thursday, was in a quandary. She put down the crayon with which she was painstakingly trying to squeeze the words, "Peace is possible," onto the white bars, between the red bars, on the small American flag she had made, and said, "Well, it is a pretty good country, so it's hard to know what to wear." Not exactly mindless nationalism, but provocative nonetheless. Among all the things Reverend Safford learned about our country in her flag-draped public schools of New York State, taught by McCarthy Democrats and Goldwater Republicans alike, was that to speak is patriotic, to speak out is patriotic, to act out even can be patriotic, to resist and to dissent and sometimes to disobey is patriotic, and to hold this government accountable is patriotic. And sometimes the cost of true patriotism can be very, very high. Retired Rabbi Robert Goldberg writes, "I'm a patriot and proud of it, with 3 files to prove it. The first of these was printed on the stationery of the House Un-American Activities Committee in the early 1950s and distributed in the parking lot of my temple and all across the state by the so-called Connecticut Committee Against Communism. I obtained the other 2 files years later, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act. Sources of inspiration that compelled my patriotic conscience were, among others, the Judaic heritage of social justice based on the Hebrew prophets, the example of other clergymen like Martin Luther King, and not least of all, the American Bill of Rights." Eric Liu, former White House speechwriter and author of the book Become America, whose parents emigrated from China to the USA at considerable personal cost, shares this story. A century and a half ago, a German immigrant named Karl Schurz was one of the young reformers who tried to bring democracy to Germany in 1848, failed, and then fled to America. He became an anti-slavery activist in Missouri, a Union general in the Civil War, and then a U.S. senator in an age of jingoism and nativism when demagogues were shouting, "My country, right or wrong." Karl Schurz counters, true patriotism isn't my country, right or wrong. It's my country, if right, to be kept right, if wrong, to be set right. In other words, not blind faith, but constant responsibility to reform, to dissent, to make sure we're living up to our creed. And I'd argue that that's a lot like being a UU, living up to our covenants inside of our congregations and the larger community. We are living in a difficult time as we approach what is likely the most important election of our lifetime, when, as declared by Reverend Safford, to speak and to hear all our many and various truths requires no small courage. To speak and hear our many truths in this place, already is a risk, because we are not of one mind politically or theologically. In fact, at UUFHC, each week we're reminded in our welcoming words that we need not think alike to love alike. We ourselves are a magnificent experiment in pluralism, says Reverend Safford. Unitarianism growing up as it did on this continent simultaneously with the Republic, and still we're learning as we go how to cherish one another's freedoms, one another's truths, as dearly as our own. We believe this house can stand our differences, can shelter and encourage them, and help each of us to hold to the agonizing discipline of complex, not simplistic reasoning, however distressing it may feel. Now back to Eric Liu, who says, "Here's what I love about my country. I love getting to take responsibility for it, the good, the bad, the ugly. Karl Schurz couldn't do that in Germany. My parents couldn't do that in China. You and I, we get to do it every day. Let's celebrate that good fortune by earning it." In a speech, former Secretary of State Antony Blinken addressed the challenges facing democracies and how we can overcome them. He says, "Let me start with an example. Consider a country where a leader is elected in a free and fair election and then sets about chipping away slowly but surely at the pillars of democracy, attacking the free press, undermining the independence of the courts, threatening political opponents. Now imagine that leader then seeks to use the levers of democracy to pass anti-democratic reforms, eliminating term limits, firing legislators, and packing courts. It's really not so hard to imagine this, but it isn't happening here. It was happening in Ecuador. Blinken goes on to note, that's the story of more than one democracy in our hemisphere. It happened in Ecuador, and it's one of the ways that democracies can come undone. It's one of the ways our own democracy could come undone. And yet, ultimately, that effort did not succeed. Why? Institutions like the Ecuadorian courts and the Electoral Council pushed back, and so did their human rights defenders and their journalists and other civil society advocates, including professors and students who challenged the reforms in the courts. And even when they were publicly smeared, threatened, and attacked, they kept at it. And what's more, tens of thousands of Ecuadorians took to the streets to protest. Trade unionists, journalists, students, indigenous people, some of whom made a 700-kilometer trek on foot from the Amazon to Quito. And even when they were beaten, arrested by police, people kept protesting. And while the president at the time succeeded in passing a number of anti-democratic bills over the years, others were blocked and were overturned and withdrawn in the face of insufficient support. Democracy persevered. And I'd say they earned it. And I wonder, as we come to the close of our flag-waving, parade-marching, fireworks-blazing 4th of July weekend, if our fears for our own democracy and our pretty good country are realized, will we? The little girl worrying about what to wear to express her patriotism at school found her own remarkable response in, I think I'm going to wear pink, beige, and turquoise for now. And so she did, a proud and scared and questioning young patriot, her allegiance to her own conscience and her trust with the adults in whose clumsy hands her entire future and our futures is contained. She was right when she tentatively acknowledged of the United States of America, it's a pretty good country. And as was noted here earlier, it's one of hundreds of pretty good countries filled with millions of pretty good, proud, and worthy people, whose other lands are filled with sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as yours and mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their lands and for mine, a song of peace for our pretty good country. So won't you join me in rising in body or spirit and singing hymn number 159, This Is My Song.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and wide. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
You may be seated. We are democracy. Unruly, unfinished, unrelenting people of rebellious joy taking to the streets. Underground resilience, resisting complacence, the pleasure of activism organizing into simple hope. We are democracy. people of principles taking on principalities, bearing witness to the worth of those called unworthy. Justice just now gaining ground. Interdependent existence extending living democracy in heads, hands, and hearts. We know that democracy can die, ossify, brittle byproducts of bygone idolists, plotting politicians, pirating votes, corporations cannibalizing our care for the world. Democracy, it can wither and it can end. Democracy, we covenant to love you alive, make you ours, make you thrive, as though all our hopes and dreams for a better world for all the nations are on the line. We are democracy. We are America. And what are you going to wear? So please join again in body or spirit for this postlude, the Star-Spangled Banner.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly gleaming, and the rockets brave the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free, o'er the land of the free, o'er the land of the free, and the home of
Now we extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the spark of love, or the flame of freedom. May their brilliance illuminate your hearts until we meet again. Amen, and blessed be.